Emily Carter stood in her kitchen, smoothing the edges of the tablecloth for the third time that evening. The smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon pie, and garlic mashed potatoes filled the air. It was Thanksgiving night, and her house buzzed with the sound of family. Laughter from the living room, children chasing each other down the hallway, her mother reminding her to check the gravy before it burns. From the outside, it was the perfect picture. Emily, a teacher who loved her job. Her husband David, a successful lawyer. Their 2 kids, a home big enough to hold the entire family. Everything looked right. Everything looked safe. Dinner was lively, the kind of noisy chaos she had always imagined hosting when she first dreamed of having her own family. Plates clattered, glasses clinked, and stories passed around the table like warm bread. Emily sat with a tired but happy smile, proud of what she had pulled together. Her younger sister teased her about overcooking the turkey. Her father chuckled at his own joke. Her son rolled his eyes at his cousins. For a moment, Emily let herself believe she had done it, created the warmth, the tradition, the love she always wanted her children to remember. But just as dessert was about to be served, David pushed his chair back with a sharp scrape. The sudden sound cut through the laughter. Emily turned to him, expecting him to raise a toast or say something clever. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white envelope. His face was cool, detached, as if this were just another business meeting. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but loud enough for every ear at the table. "I think it's time you faced reality." He placed the envelope in front of her. Confused, Emily picked it up, her hands trembling slightly. She opened it, and her heart stopped. Divorce papers. For a second, she couldn't breathe. The room fell into stunned silence. Forks clinked against plates as people froze mid-bite. Her mother gasped softly, her sister's smile vanished, and the children looked around, confused by the sudden shift. Emily's face burned as every eye turned toward her. David leaned back in his chair, lips curling in something close to a smirk. "I just can't do this anymore," he said coldly. "You're not enough of a wife for me." The words sliced through her like a knife. Not enough. Not enough. They echoed in her head, louder than the silence pressing down on the table. Emily wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor, to run from the shame. But she sat frozen, her fingers gripping the envelope so tightly the paper crumpled. Around her, no one moved. Her mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her father stared down at his plate. Her sister busied herself with her wine glass. No one defended her. No one said a word. David stood, straightened his jacket, and left the table as if he had simply finished dinner. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the house. Emily's world crumbled in that instant. The laughter, the warmth, the tradition shattered. Her family looked at her, awkward and helpless, and she felt more alone than ever before. Inside her head, one thought rose above the humiliation, above the heartbreak. He could have done this in private, but he wanted me broken. And in that moment, I promised myself, I'd rise again. Emily and David's story had started like something out of a romance novel. She was 23, freshly graduated, full of dreams of building a career in education, and maybe writing a book one day. He was already in law school, confident and ambitious, always talking about the future as if he could hold it in his hands. Emily fell for him quickly, his charm, his intelligence, the way he made her feel like she was the most important person in the room. They married young. The early years were filled with laughter, late-night pizza, and whispered promises about how they would conquer the world together. David struggled through long nights of study and exams, and Emily stood by him, cheering him on, typing up his notes, even working extra hours at the school to help pay the bills. She was proud of him. She thought their sacrifices were temporary, that once he became a lawyer, life would settle into balance. When their first child was born, Emily made a choice. She put aside her bigger career ambitions to stay home, to be the steady hand their baby needed while David built his practice. She told herself it was worth it, that families required compromise, that her time would come later. David often reminded her how important his work was, how it was for all of them. She believed him. But as the years went by, small cracks began to show. David's tone shifted, less gentle, more dismissive. He would wave away her thoughts with a quick, "You don't understand how things work," or "Leave it to me, Emily." The late nights at the office stretched longer. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all until dawn, brushing it off as cases or meetings. She wanted to trust him, but trust began to feel heavier and heavier. Once, while folding his laundry, she caught a faint perfume on one of his shirts. Not hers. When she asked, he laughed, saying it must have been from a client hugging him. Another time, she glanced at his phone when it buzzed. He snatched it quickly, too quickly, muttering that it was just work. Those moments lodged in her chest like tiny stones. She didn't want to believe what they meant, so she buried them. Her family had always been complicated. Emily's mother, traditional and stubborn, often reminded her that marriage was a lifelong duty. Hold the marriage together, she would say. No one is perfect, but a good wife keeps the home steady. Her father, quiet but sharp, rarely said anything about David outright, but Emily could see the tightness in his jaw when David interrupted her or spoke over her. Her younger sister, on the other hand, often made sly comments about Emily's perfect life. She envied the house, the children, the security, even though Emily herself felt it was a cage. By the time she was 38, Emily's days followed a strict rhythm. She woke early to prepare breakfast, packed lunches, taught her classes, hurried home to cook dinner, managed homework, and kept the house running smoothly. Teaching gave her a sense of purpose, but even that was overshadowed by David, who treated her less like a partner and more like his personal assistant. He expected her to keep track of his meetings, handle social invitations, and even fetch his dry cleaning. Every now and then, a new clue about his double life slipped into her routine. A receipt for an expensive dinner she hadn't attended. Lipstick faintly staining a napkin stuffed in his suit pocket. Late-night texts that made him walk into another room, whispering. She told herself she was imagining it, that confronting him would only make her look insecure. Still inside, Emily felt herself shrinking. The vibrant woman who once had dreams and fire in her heart had been replaced by someone who moved carefully, afraid of disrupting the fragile peace in her home. She looked in the mirror and saw a mother, a caretaker, a teacher, but not the woman she once was. She felt invisible to the man she had given everything to. Thanksgiving night had only pulled the curtain back. What she had been enduring quietly, alone, was suddenly dragged into the light for her entire family to witness. Her private shame had become public humiliation. And though her heart broke that night, part of her knew. This was the moment she could no longer hide. After the dinner fiasco, David walked out with a smug smile, like he had just won something. The sound of the door closing echoed in the quiet house, leaving Emily frozen in her seat. Everyone else avoided her eyes, fumbling with their plates, murmuring excuses, pretending they hadn't just watched her life collapse in front of them. Emily stood up slowly, her hands shaking, and excused herself without a word. She walked upstairs to her bedroom, shut the door and locked it. As soon as she was alone, her body gave out. She fell to the floor, clutching the divorce papers to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. Through the thin walls, faint whispers carried upstairs. Relatives downstairs were murmuring, not realizing she could hear. She must have failed as a wife, one voice said. David always seemed so perfect, maybe it was her. The words stabbed deeper than the papers in her hands. She pressed her palms to her ears, trying to block them out, but the damage was done. Shame wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. Even in her darkest moment, no one stood up for her. Not her mother, not her sister, not even her father. That night, Emily barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she replayed David's smirk, his cruel words. Not enough of a wife. Days passed, each one harder than the last. David didn't call, didn't text, didn't ask about the children. Instead, Emily's son stumbled upon a cruel truth first. He saw a picture online. David at a restaurant, arm around a younger woman. A woman Emily recognized from his law firm. Her stomach dropped as she realized David hadn't just left her. He had already moved on. Emily drove past his office one evening, unable to resist. Her suspicions were confirmed when she saw his car parked not outside the office, but outside a luxury apartment building across town. Through the lobby glass, she saw him laughing with the woman. She felt like the ground beneath her had cracked open. But it didn't end there. Days later, a letter arrived from David's lawyer. Cold, formal words spelled out his intentions. He wanted the house. He wanted custody of the children. He wanted everything. Emily's hands trembled as she read. Her whole body went numb. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war. He wasn't satisfied with humiliating her on Thanksgiving. He wanted to strip away her home, her security, her role as a mother. That night, sitting alone in the darkened kitchen, Emily broke down completely. She cried until her throat ached, rocking back and forth on the cold floor. She whispered to herself, "Why me? What did I do wrong? Am I really not enough?" But as the hours passed, something inside her shifted. The tears dried. Her chest still ached, but a spark lit in her heart, faint but fierce. For years she had stayed silent, swallowing her doubts, keeping peace for the sake of appearances. Silence had cost her everything. Her dignity, her marriage, her sense of self. Now David wanted to take her children too. And that, she realized, she could never allow. She stood up from the kitchen floor and looked at her reflection in the window. Her face was tired, her eyes swollen, but in them, she saw something she hadn't seen in years: fire. David thought he had broken her. He thought she would quietly accept whatever he decided. But he was wrong. Emily whispered to herself, steady and clear, "I won't let him take everything. I will fight back." And with that promise, the battle truly began. Emily hired a lawyer friend from her teaching days, someone she trusted, someone who cared about her as a person, not just a client. But the moment the case began, she realized how brutal it would be. David had money, resources, and the kind of arrogance that came from years of winning battles in the courtroom. He walked in with a team of sharp lawyers, all dressed in expensive suits, armed with strategies to tear her apart. To David, this wasn't just a divorce. It was another case to win, another opponent to crush. Every time Emily's lawyer tried to argue her side, David's team twisted the story, painting her as weak, unstable, and incapable of raising the children alone. They accused her of being too emotional, too dependent, too distracted by her job to be a good mother. Each hearing left Emily drained, her confidence chipped away piece by piece. At home, things weren't easier. Her mother sat across from her at the kitchen table one evening, speaking in that firm, old-fashioned tone. "Emily, maybe you should think about reconciliation," she said. "For the kids. Marriage isn't about happiness, it's about keeping the family together." Emily's stomach turned. After everything David had done, after the humiliation and betrayal, her mother still wanted her to bow her head and forgive. Her sister was worse. She openly sided with David, suddenly visiting him often, accepting favors from him. Emily found out her sister had asked David for help with a loan, and he had agreed, on the condition she put in a good word for him in the family. Betrayal layered on betrayal, leaving Emily with no one to trust. Even in her church community, where she had once found comfort, whispers followed her. David played the victim, telling people how hard he had tried, how ungrateful Emily was, how he only wanted what was best for the children. Some people believed him. Others looked at Emily with pity, their eyes filled with silent judgment. Her children were caught in the middle. Her teenage son grew angrier by the day. He hated what David had done, but sometimes he turned that anger on Emily. "Why can't you be stronger?" he snapped one evening after another tense court day. "Why do you let him walk all over you?" His words cut her deeply because she asked herself the same question every night. Her younger daughter cried often, crawling into Emily's lap, begging her to make Daddy come home. Emily held her tightly, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. One night, after a particularly harsh hearing where David's lawyer accused her of being financially careless, Emily returned home and sank onto the cold kitchen floor. She clutched her knees to her chest and let the sobs pour out. The house was silent except for her cries. She whispered to herself, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I am worthless. Maybe I wasn't enough." The words echoed in the empty kitchen, and for the first time, she believed them. But the turning point came from places she didn't expect. Her father, usually so quiet, came to see her a few days later. He sat across from her, his face serious but kind. "Emily," he said softly, "I've watched David for years. I never liked the way he treated you. You may think you're weak, but I see strength in you. You raised your children, you built a home, you gave everything. Don't let him take that from you. Not now." His words, simple but steady, planted a seed inside her. A reminder that she wasn't alone, not completely. At school, one of her colleagues noticed her exhaustion and pulled her aside. "Emily, you're one of the best teachers here. The kids love you. You inspire them. Don't forget that you matter outside of all this chaos." Emily felt tears sting her eyes, but for once, they weren't only from sadness. They were from the faint spark of hope that maybe she still had worth. Slowly, Emily began to reclaim pieces of herself. She threw herself into her teaching, finding joy in her students' laughter and the lessons she created. She started documenting everything: David's lies, his financial games, his neglect as a father. Every text, every receipt, every broken promise, she saved it all. It gave her a sense of control, a way to fight back, even if quietly. She no longer waited for someone else to rescue her. She realized she had to be her own anchor, for herself and for her children. Every day she stood a little taller, spoke a little firmer, and let the spark inside her grow. David had underestimated her. For years, he saw her silence as weakness. But Emily was no longer silent. She was preparing for the fight of her life, and this time, she wasn't going to break. David arrogantly argued before the judge that he deserved full custody of the children. He stood tall in his expensive suit, his voice calm but full of pride. "Your Honor," he said, "Emily is too weak and unstable to care for our children properly. She is emotional, distracted by her job, and cannot provide the stable home I can. I've always been the reliable parent. I should have custody." His words echoed in the courtroom. Behind him, some of Emily's relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, nodding slightly, as if they believed him. David glanced at them with a smug smile, convinced victory was already his. But Emily did not flinch this time. She stood slowly, her hands steady on the table, her voice clear though her heart pounded. "Your Honor," she said, "David has painted a picture of himself that is not true. I have evidence to prove it." Her lawyer handed the judge a folder filled with carefully documented proof, receipts of expensive dinners with another woman, late-night hotel charges, and hidden bank withdrawals. Emily explained how David had drained family accounts, how he had lied about his income, how he had left the children alone for hours while chasing his own pleasures. Each piece of evidence was like a stone, breaking apart the perfect image David had built. David's confident smile began to fade. He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight, but still tried to interrupt. "Those are misunderstandings. She's twisting everything." Then came the moment no one expected. Emily's teenage son stood up from his seat in the courtroom. His voice shook at first, but he looked directly at the judge. "I want to say something," he said. The judge allowed it. The boy's words pierced the silence. "I've seen my dad yell at my mom. I've seen him call her names, tell her she's worthless. He wasn't there when we needed him. He cared more about his work and about other women than about us." His voice cracked, but he stood firm. "My mom is the strong one. She's the one who takes care of us. I want to live with her." Gasps rippled through the room. Emily's relatives, who had doubted her for so long, looked shocked. David's carefully crafted image as the perfect father collapsed in seconds. But the twist was still to come. The courtroom doors opened, and in walked the younger woman David had left Emily for. All eyes turned as she strode to the front, her face pale but determined. She asked to speak, and the judge allowed her a statement. Her voice was sharp, trembling with anger. "David promised me everything. He told me he loved me, that he was leaving his wife because she was unworthy. But just a few weeks ago, he discarded me too. He's already seeing someone else. And I have messages, Your Honor." She handed her phone to the court clerk, filled with texts where David manipulated her, bragged about lying to his wife, and even admitted he planned to take the children just to break Emily completely. The room fell into stunned silence. David's face drained of color. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but his voice stumbled. His arrogance was gone. The judge's tone was final and firm. "Mr. Carter, your actions show a pattern of deceit, manipulation, and neglect. This court cannot grant you custody. Custody will remain with Mrs. Carter." In that single moment, David lost everything: custody, his reputation, and the support of the family members who had once stood behind him. The mask he had worn for so long had been ripped away, and all that remained was the truth: a man who had betrayed his wife, his children, and even his mistress. Emily sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, tears in her eyes. Not tears of pain this time, but of relief. She had fought back, And she had won. Emily won custody of her children and secured the house. The judge's decision felt like a heavy weight lifting off her shoulders. For months she had lived in fear of losing her children, her home, and even her sense of self. Now, standing on the courthouse steps with her lawyer and children by her side, she finally breathed freely. That night, when the house was quiet, Emily walked to the mirror in her bedroom. For years, whenever she looked at her reflection, she had seen only exhaustion, shame, and doubt. But now something was different. Her face was still lined with the pain of the battle she had fought, but her eyes were brighter. There was strength there, a quiet power she had almost forgotten she possessed. She touched the glass gently and whispered, "I'm still here. And I'm not broken." Life after the court case was not instantly perfect, but it was hers to rebuild. Emily threw herself into her teaching career with renewed passion. She started staying after school to work with struggling students, and for the first time in years, she felt proud of what she was accomplishing outside of her home. She began writing again, filling notebooks with ideas for the book she had once dreamed of. At home, she worked on repairing the bonds that had been strained. Her teenage son, who had carried so much anger, slowly began to soften. One evening he sat at the kitchen table and mumbled, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean all those things I said before." Emily hugged him tightly, telling him he had nothing to apologize for. Her daughter, who once cried every night for her father, now found peace in knowing her mother would always be there. Laughter slowly returned to the house, filling the empty spaces David had left behind. Her father also became a steady presence. He started visiting often, fixing things around the house, and sometimes just sitting quietly with Emily over coffee. One afternoon he told her, "I'm proud of you. You stood taller than anyone expected." His words meant more to her than he knew. Even her extended family, who had doubted her, began to see her differently. At gatherings, her mother no longer pushed her toward reconciliation, but instead praised her for her strength. Her sister, once quick to side with David, avoided the topic altogether. Her envy now mixed with reluctant respect. Emily didn't need their approval anymore, but she noticed the shift, and it reminded her how far she had come. David, on the other hand, was left with nothing. Word spread quickly about what had happened in court. His law firm began to distance themselves from him, his reputation damaged. The younger woman who had once stood by him refused to see him again, and others wanted nothing to do with him. He was stripped of his pride, his power, and his carefully built image. He had tried to break Emily, but in the end, he had broken himself. Emily no longer wasted energy on him. Her focus was on her children, her work, and herself. For the first time in years, she woke up each morning not with dread, but with quiet hope. She had survived betrayal, humiliation, and loneliness, and she had risen stronger than before. The house, once a place of tension, now became a home filled with warmth. On weekends, Emily cooked with her children, played music in the kitchen, and filled the rooms with laughter. Each small moment felt like a victory. Each smile was proof that healing was real. Emily knew the scars would remain, but she also knew they no longer defined her. What defined her now was resilience, courage, and the love she had fought so hard to protect. A year later, Thanksgiving again. Emily's dining table looked different this time. It wasn't grand or crowded, but it was warm. The food was simple, the laughter was real, and the people around her were those who truly cared. Her children sat close, relaxed, and happy in a way she hadn't seen in years. The weight of last Thanksgiving, the humiliation, the shock, the heartbreak, still lived in her memory. But tonight it no longer hurt. It only reminded her how far she had come. She raised her glass, her eyes shining with quiet strength. "Last year," she said softly, "I thought my life was ending. But it was just beginning. Betrayal broke me, but healing rebuilt me." Her son smiled proudly, her daughter squeezed her hand, and her father gave her a small nod from across the table. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt whole. David was no longer a shadow in her home. His voice, his arrogance, his control gone. What remained was peace. What remained was hers. The room filled with warmth as everyone clinked their glasses together. Emily sat back, looking at her children's faces lit with joy, and she smiled. The camera slowly closed in on that smile. A woman who had been broken, who had been betrayed, but who had risen stronger than ever. Her story was no longer one of loss. It was one of victory. Thanksgiving had finally found its true meaning for her. EBUBE. Sparkling Heart, thank you so much for staying till the end. Don't forget to like, drop a comment, and hit subscribe for more stories. See you next time. Bye. Waving hand.